Welcome to Aspire Australia's presentation and introduction to understanding Australia's employment visa program. We're on a mission. We're on a mission to help intending migrants to Australia obtain the best advice and information possible so that you can make appropriate decisions about your Australian visa strategy. Hi, I'm Sarah Gillis. I've been working in Australia's migration industry for more than 25 years. And through that time, I've helped many clients achieve both temporary and permanent visas in the employment migration program. So today, you're in the right place if you want to have a great life in Australia, if you're motivated to do what it takes to achieve your goal, and you want clear and correct information that will guide you towards that goal. By the end of today's session, you'll have an understanding of Australia's employment visa framework, an understanding of your own eligibility, and what you need to do to meet the criteria for an employment visa. Your goal is your golden ticket, your Australian visa. Always keep that in mind, what you're working towards. So in the employment pathway, there are options in temporary visas and permanent visas. And for some of those temporary visas, they may be a pathway to a permanent residence visa. So we will go through these options. You may be interested in permanent residence, but it may not be possible to obtain that visa directly. Through the employer nomination program, there is a direct entry pathway if you have 3 years work experience. But if you don't yet have that, you may need to move through a temporary visa in order to gradually increase your work experience and meet the requirements for permanent residence. And we also have regional visas in which the Australian government is encouraging migrants to bring their skills to regional areas of Australia. So where to start? One good place to start is to look at what occupation you may be able to claim. And that occupation will be based on qualifications and work experience that you may have. So you can look at your attributes and then match those up with an occupation or several occupations on the medium and long-term list, the short-term list, or the regional list. And if you can highlight some occupations on those lists, then you can see which visas you may be eligible for. So that's a good starting point. Let's now look at the visas one by one so you can determine which may be suitable for you. The trainee visa is a good place to start if you need to accumulate work experience that you could use towards an employment visa. So you can obtain a training visa if you have an Australian business that will provide you with the training. The training will be undertaken on the job and will usually be paid. It will be matched with a training plan that will be for a period that relates to your career plan and pathway. So you could have a training plan that is only for 6 months, or you could have a training plan that is for as long as 2 years. Your occupation needs to be on the 407 occupation list, which is quite a broad list. And you yourself must have a recent 12 months experience in that occupation or relevant to that occupation. And experience here doesn't necessarily mean employment, it can include qualifications. So if you have recently finished a qualification, you may be able to claim that as your recent 12 months experience. You'll need to produce your career plan and show how this on-the-job training will be related to the career outcomes you wish to achieve. The next visa is the sponsored working visa, for which you must have 2 years relevant employment before you can apply for that visa. So you will see how obtaining the training visa may help you achieve this outcome. You must also have the skill level for that occupation, and that may mean work experience, registration or qualification, or a combination of all three. Your employer must have a genuine position available that matches an occupation on one of the three occupation lists. They must be financially able to pay you a market rate salary, and they may have to advertise to show that there is no Australian available to fill the position. If your occupation is on the short-term list, then you must show that you only have a genuine temporary intention in relation to Australia. But if your occupation is on the medium and long-term list, you will have a pathway to a permanent residence visa. So when we talk about the employment, it must meet these factors to be acceptable. So it must be in your occupation or a closely related occupation. So the tasks that you have undertaken must match the generic tasks that would be undertaken for that occupation. Your work must be at the skill level, and usually that means that it will be after you have achieved the relevant qualification. Employment must be paid, so volunteer work is not acceptable, and you must have worked a minimum of 20 hours a week. So if your work experience has been for 10 hours a week, even if it is after your qualification, it will not be considered acceptable. Similar to the 482 visa, the 494 is a temporary sponsored work visa, but your employer and employment will be in regional Australia. The occupation list is more limited to the regional and short-term list, and you must have more work experience under your belt before you can apply for this visa. So you must have at least 3 years work experience, and you must have a skills assessment. You must have a commitment to living in a regional area, and if you do hold this visa, it does have a pathway to permanent residence after 3 years. And all the same requirements apply to the employer about genuine position, financial ability, etc. So skills assessment required for the 494 visa will depend on your occupation. Usually all occupations require a qualification, although some may require only work experience. So, for example, an accountant will not only need a qualification that contains accounting subjects, but will also need proficient English. An IT graduate will need work experience or a professional year. A cook or a mechanic or any other trade may have a qualification and will need at least 3 years work experience. So understanding not only which occupation you may wish to assess, but whether you meet the skills assessment requirement is essential before you start looking into your eligibility for the 494 visa. The skills assessment is also the foundation for the permanent residence employer nomination direct visa. So if you have 3 years experience and a skills assessment, you may be eligible for this visa. You will notice that your occupation needs to be on the medium and long-term list. So if you have a skills assessment and 3 years experience, you will apply for the employer nomination direct if your occupation is on the medium and long-term list. But if it is only on the short-term list, then you may wish to apply for the 482 or the regional 494 visa. Holding the 482 visa may provide you with a pathway to the employer nomination transitional visa if your occupation is on the medium and long-term list. So having achieved the 482 visa, once you've worked for your employer for 3 years, you may transition to the permanent residence visa. English is a requirement for each of these visas. The 482 and 494 have a requirement that's slightly less than competent English, and the permanent residence visas require you to have competent English. And in some cases, you can show English medium studies as an alternative to an English test result. So possible pathways for employer under the employment program could include the following. You could start with a 482 visa if you already have 2 years work experience. If you need to gain work experience, you may do that through the training visa or through another visa. Once you have a total of 3 years, then you may be eligible for the employer nomination direct entry pathway. So you had 2 years to get into the 482 visa. You complete 1 more year and you'll be eligible for the permanent residence visa if your occupation is on the medium and long-term list. Alternatively, the second option is to work on the 482 visa for a period of 3 years. Now, you might choose that option if you're unable to get a successful skills assessment. For the 494 visa, you'll work in a regional job for 3 years and then be eligible for the permanent residence. If, however, you're working in a metropolitan or non-regional area and your occupation is on the short-term list, unfortunately, you'll only be able to achieve a 2-year visa, which can be renewed twice. That will have no prospects of permanent residence through the employer nomination scheme. Let's have a look at a few case studies. Amit is 25 years old, and from his home country, he has a Bachelor of Commerce and some work experience. He's here in Australia as an international student studying a Master of Finance. After his qualification, he obtains the postgraduate 485 visa and gets some work experience, both in Sydney and Canberra. He decides that he will get also a training visa so that he can complete 3 years of work experience before being sponsored by his regional employer for the 494 visa. And he sticks at that job for a further 3 years to get the 191 visa. It's a long pathway, but in the end, he achieves permanent residence. Gloria is also an international student, having done a Bachelor of Technology and with 1 year's overseas work experience. And she's here again studying in the IT sector. She obtains the 485 visa and gets 1 year experience to give her a total of 2 years that will allow her to get the 482 sponsored visa. She's not in a regional area, she's working in a metro area. While she's on that visa, she gets a skills assessment in her IT occupation. And once she has accumulated a total of 3 years work experience, she's nominated for permanent residence under the 186 direct entry pathway. And she also achieves permanent residence. If you think that the employment visa stream might be for you, then we'd love to help you. We can take you from advice through preparation of your application until you achieve your outcome. And in the employment visa categories, we help both you and your employer. Now, we love rules because they show us the pathway to possible. So that's where we unlock our superpowers and advise you about your clear prospects of obtaining a visa in the employment visa program. So if your dream is to live and work in Australia, we're here to make that a reality. And we invite you to contact us to book your discovery session. I look forward to talking to you then.